Hey everybody, Joe Mayers here, and this is the Think Forever podcast. We have an awesome interview coming up for you with my friend Nick Steward. He is the author of the novel Black Threads, the host of the Death of Death podcast. He is a coach to writers and is an absolute wordsmith himself. Before we get into that, I want to read one of our 5-star reviews. This one comes in from Z-Bone. It says, Think Forever is a great listen. Joe Mayers is a talented storyteller who engages the audience with a fresh look into lesser-known characters from the Bible. Well, thank you for that review, Z-Bone. Really appreciate the kind words, and it explains exactly what we're trying to do with this show. If you would like to hear your review read out, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review, and I'll choose one of those for every one of these behind-the-scenes episodes that we do. All right, without further ado, please enjoy Nick Steward. We're trying to get a you vibe, a Nick Steward, the author vibe.
It's a dark vibe. It's a dark and
yeah, you look very moody
vibe
with the dark headphones and the dark shirt and the dark bookcase, and well, you just sat down in front of it, but that was very prominently featured against the backdrop.
Yeah, that's like the boldest. It's just the whitest cover with just the starkest title. Like it always sticks out on all my videos.
Yeah. Well, it sticks out on everyone's bookshelf because everything's all like nice and uniform and dark. And then you got Stephen King, It. There's no hiding.
A couple of years ago, they re-released like the minimalist one that was like not the movie cover, so it's like even more bold and
Yeah, dude. I love it when they do like the aesthetic re-releases.
Yeah.
And you can have I think I've got 3 different copies of the Lord of the Rings works, just because like I have the ones that I read originally when I was a kid, and then I got one that's like all of the stories together. It's like The Hobbit plus the Lord of the Rings plus the Silmarillion all bound together. And then somebody gave me, it was like one of the original special editions.
Oh, nice.
So it's some special edition of everything from like the early 70s, I think. It's
like all the Christopher Tolkien stuff too?
No, it's just the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
Just 1, 2, 3, and the Hobbit's not in there. But it's like a really nice like leather with silver leaf and really good artwork throughout. Yeah, it's awesome. I
gave my sister The Hobbit and the 3 Lord of the Rings in a newer series 4 or 5 years ago that was like very dark with like gold titling and stuff, and I think the pages were fringed with gold too. Really cool.
I'm such a sucker
I haven't
for
seen
that.
those again, but
I will needlessly buy a book that I already own multiple copies of just because it looks awesome.
Yeah.
It's like a different experience reading it when you get to hold something that looks cool too.
Yeah.
I just started reading The Hobbit to my son Tolkien.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's almost 5, and so I figured he can kind of keep up with the story now. And we just got past the trolls. Oh, he loves it. I have to do voices for everything.
Yeah.
to keep it entertaining.
Yeah, so you make it entertaining.
Yeah. Well, and he just
everyone always says how boring that book is.
No imagination.
That's what I think. Yeah, I think if someone's reading it to you with awesome voices, it's probably rad.
Yeah.
I've never read it.
You've never read The Hobbit?
No.
I have to rethink our relationship right now, dude, honestly.
If that's what did it, then I've got questions for you, because there's been plenty of reasons over the years.
Yeah.
I just read Chronicles of Narnia in 2019.
For the first time?
For the first time.
Wow. Yeah. Man, I'm learning new stuff about you today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not well read.
I feel like you are pretty well read. It might be a different sort of niche.
Yeah. here and there. But there's even like theological works that I've not read. I've never read Knowing God by J.I. Packer. That's like a big one everyone loves, and I've never read it. But
well, I went to a Christian college, and so I think just because we had required Bible classes and chapels and things like that, where they were going to make you read the book and give you a quiz on it. I think that's sort of where that came from. Otherwise, I'm just reading the ones that I'm actually interested in. Like, just because it's a bestseller doesn't mean you necessarily need to read it. So I do want to get into your story, but first, I think it's important that we recap the first time that you and I hung out in person. This is one of my favorite first hangouts with anybody ever.
I have no idea what you're about to say right now.
You don't remember this?
I don't know if I know for sure. I don't know for sure the first time we hung out.
Okay.
I think it was at the Blind Pig, but I don't even know what you're going to say.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. This sticks in my mind. Like, this was a big moment for me. So we were just starting to go to church together. It was right when the church was starting. And you were playing music and I was playing music, and we were thinking, well, we should probably hang out and get to know each other a little bit. And so we went over to the Blind Pig. We're like, hey, we'll grab a beer. We'll just chat and get to know each other. And I got there a little bit before you did, and I saved you a seat. And you roll up and you're like, hey man, good to see you. And I'm like, hey, good to see you too. And you plop down, and without saying anything else, you say, so what's your eschatology like?
That was my favorite question to catch people off guard with, because if you want to get into theology, you can learn almost everything you want to know about them by how uncomfortable they get with it. Because like, if they're dispensationalist, then there is only one eschatology. You've only got one thing to talk about. You don't even know about the other ones. Mm-hmm. So if you see people kind of go, what? Why would you ask me that? It's like, okay, yeah, you believe something interesting that we can talk about.
So I didn't even know your last name. And and I knew a lot of your thoughts about the end times. And you didn't know yet
jerk
that I was performing a live show that was all about eternity and end times and things like that. So we had a lot to talk about.
That. I remember talking about that.
Yeah.
But I do not remember starting the evening that way, and that makes me cringe. That's crazy. Dude, that I did that.
It was crazy that you did that, but I loved it. And even though we live on opposite sides of the country, we are best friends for life.
Absolutely.
So the starkness of your conversation starting is exactly in line with the starkness of your writing to me. The story that we had from you was really cool. We'll get into the specifics of that later. But I want to know a little bit more about you as a writer first. So for you, when did the love of storytelling begin, and who are some of your influences?
I want to say when I was 10 or 11, there were a few things all at once that got me into writing. My sister was big into creative writing when she was in junior high and high school. She wrote wild stuff. She had a series of short stories called When Yetis Attack, and it was all about like people who survived Yeti attacks. And she had like a story
about the Steward family has a
brand squirrel that was, yeah, absolutely. There was a cannibalistic squirrel that was kicked out of his little squirrel village because of his, appetites. And she just came up with stuff that you just don't see anywhere else. And I was also very into Lost and Star Wars, which are very unique stories with their unique worlds. And I think that was all around the same age, like 10 or 11. And a lot of people will be into stuff like that and will decide to be an actor or a director or, something. But I realized like the ones that are really making this magic, like the ones that are inventing these things out of thin air, are the writers.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of when I started.
Yeah. And would you say that more the TV writers and the story producers and things like that were more of an influence than just novel writing?
To this day, I learn more from television writers than novelists because, and I think I've tried to figure it out, but I think it's because they are on such tight schedules and have to produce so much in such a short amount of time that they've learned a lot of tricks about how to spark creativity. And there's things that I always tell people to say bad example before you say an idea, because it just takes the pressure off of your idea. And that's something I heard Mitchell Hurwitz say, who was the creator of Arrested Development. And, Damon Lindelof from Lost and Greg Daniels from The Office and King of the Hill. Like, if you listen to these guys talk, you're going to learn something about writing that's going to change the way you write forever, probably within 2 minutes. They're just full of knowledge and not that I haven't learned anything from novelists or any other kind of writer, but they seem to really have formulas for what they do.
Yeah. Well, I got to witness your method of writing from start to finish because when I first asked you if you would be interested in writing a story for the show, you came back with this story that was kind of wild, and we talked about it. And you're like, okay, I'll keep you in the loop. And so I got to see drafts that you were writing as you were doing it, which I think probably most people aren't privy to, but it was very methodical and it was well oiled. I think that sort of methodology is elusive for a lot of creative people. So how did you arrive at that? Like, walk us through how you got to the point where you have that level of self-discipline. Was it intentional? Was that just the way that you learned in the first place? Because I think that is something that is sometimes hard for creative people to grasp.
Yes. I'd say there's a couple areas in writing that you're going to want to conquer, and one is like sparking creativity. One is the fine tuning of words and like finding the best phrasing for something. And then the other is the discipline. And for me, I remember in 2017 just setting a daily goal to write 100 words a day, which sounds like a lot, small. But I challenge you to write. What was that?
Yeah, something where you're not like, hey, I'm going to write a chapter a day, but you're just like, I'm going to get my pen out and I'm going to make it happen. Yeah.
Exactly. That is, I challenge anyone to write 100 words and then look at that space on the page and tell me that's a lot. Anyone can do that. Mm-hmm. And that became a habit. I finished, that was kind of coming back to writing after many years of not really completing anything. And I finished a short story and writing in various different aspects, like whether the blog or notes for the podcast or whatever I'm doing. It's pretty much been a daily habit ever since I made that daily goal. And for the book that I'm starting to wrap up now, my goal was closer to like 1,000 words a day, but I never would have been able to do that without setting an attainable goal and realizing that I could attain it every day, and then realizing that it's all just an issue of scaling from there.
Yeah.
So that's really how it started, and then but that wouldn't have necessarily flourished into anything if there wasn't some kind of passion for it. And so that's something that it may not come naturally. You may want to write, but not really have the passion to do the work. And that's something that I think can be learned through discipline. I think actually doing it kind of helps you want to do it more. Yeah. Accomplishing something definitely makes you want to do it.
Yeah. And what does Stephen King say about writing? If you want to be a writer, you got to do two things above all else. Read a lot, write a lot.
Read and write.
Yeah. You just got to do it. So in your mind, it's kind of like anything, whether it's going to be a habit of exercise or a specific type of diet or spending time with your spouse intentionally when things get, busy or whatever. It's got to be intentional, and you got to build that habit.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it was
a lot of people don't want to. They don't want to do that because they want to just love it, and they want it to just be, the writer's life is such a fictionalized, pardon the pun, kind of fantastical idea of like a guy in a ratty sweater who's like living by the beach, and he, doesn't do anything all day. And it's like, well, that's just not what a writer's life is for the most part. So if you don't have some kind of love for getting up and doing the work, you're not gonna do it.
Yeah.
If you're waiting around for the inspiration, you might write, 300 words a year.
Well, and it can't just be when the circumstances are ideal either. I love getting away, going up to the mountains and having a few days where I can just read and write, and that's it. And those are great times. But I have an almost 5-year-old son who is the most energetic being I have ever encountered. And I have a wife, and I have other responsibilities, and so that just doesn't happen. And the only way that I'm going to get that done is by setting that schedule. And I think my process probably looks different from yours, but they're similar in that way, that there is a schedule that's laid out, and that's the only way to really grow.
For me, it is. For me, a schedule is, and a daily goal is the only way that it's going to happen. For other people, maybe you're lucky enough to be able to sit down at 10 p.m. and actually get your thing done. But for me, I got to get it in as early as possible to be sure it actually gets done. And I find that the thing that feeds that flame and keeps that going is the tiny accomplishments along the way. I have a very well thought out process for all the different drafts that I do. And that also kind of helps you feel like you're accomplishing something. If anyone wants to go to my Instagram, I did a video on the different drafts, and the purpose for each one. So people can know about that. But, you just got to look for things as accomplishments that you may not have thought of. I mentioned Lost earlier, and, that story, was so emotional for me because it ran from when I was 10 to when I was 16. So it's just, you could not have been dealing with a more emotional time of life. And it is such a heart-wrenching story. And I realized, early on that I want to affect people emotionally the way that this story does. And I was not looking for this. I was not expecting this, but my buddy, shout out to Tim Failer, was one of the first people to finish my book, and to this day, probably one of the only people to finish my book. And he messaged me, and he just told me, "Hey, I was really invested in this story, and I got kind of emotional at the end." And I was like, "Whoa! I just accomplished that thing that I wanted to when I was 10.
Yeah,
and I wasn't
dude,
I wasn't even expecting this to be the day.
That's so
it just
cool.
Happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that, dude. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of compliments that you
can take
get
something like that, and
you can't ask for that kind of compliment.
Yeah.
That's just something where
that wasn't a big comment for him. That didn't mean much to him. He probably to this day doesn't think about it, but like
it was just honest.
Everything to me. So
wow, that's really cool. Nice. Okay, so let's switch gears for a sec. I appreciate you going through that process, and I will link at the end your Instagram and stuff like that, because you actually kind of go through some of this stuff a little bit more in depth, that I think would be helpful for people who are writing, to kind of see what the process is. So we'll link that in the description of this.
Cool.
But I want
to get back into doing those videos, because we had a baby recently, so I've taken a couple months off, but it is my intention to get back there and start producing regular content to give people like a quick tool that they can use in their writing today.
Yeah. Well, side note, congratulations on being a dad, dude.
Oh, thank you.
Huge life step, and glad you took a little bit of time away to just chill.
Yep.
So, okay. So I want to talk about your story. Fear God, not man.
Mhm.
What initially drew you to this story, and why does it matter?
A couple years ago, I want to say 2020, I was doing an episode of my podcast that was all just spooky stories from the Bible and from church history.
Mm-hmm.
And in my research for that one, I became aware of this legend of Saint Dennis or Denis.
Yeah.
I have to call him Dennis. I don't know. I'm American. I got to do it. So
That's the living in Oklahoma that's coming out in you now.
Yeah. So this story about a guy getting his head cut off for preaching the gospel and then picking it up and walking around with it and continuing to preach the gospel is just such a cool story. And I covered it a little bit on the podcast, but it was like one of 5 things that I did on that episode. Another great one is the disembodied hand writing on the wall in Daniel. That's a great story. So I was kind of doing all these, and I knew I wanted to do something with this concept of a body picking up a head and walking around with it. And as soon as you told me that like the stories on this podcast are like not historical fiction, kind of from biblical times and throughout church history, the first thing that came to my mind was this story. And I was like, he's probably not going to want to do this one, but I'd be stupid not to throw it out there and ask. So like, let's just see what he says,
Yeah.
And you were down. So I was like, all right, I'm going to write it. I'm pretty sure it's not going to turn into anything you can use, but I'll give you a rough draft and then we'll pick the real story or something. But it just,
no, dude, the story turned out really cool. And that's one of the things I like about doing this show is that it's not about forcing everybody into the box of the kind of stories that I write. What I really like doing is finding people and having them write their kind of story and just highlighting it. Because it's the same way with anything we do. It's the same way with creative people as it is with all sorts of talents. Everybody has their own style and the thing that they're good at. And that's really valuable to the world, and it's valuable as part of the body of believers as well, that we all have our own ways of telling a story. Like I would tell the story super different from you, but that's what makes it really special.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the genre of what we're doing is historical fiction. So we're taking stories that we know a little bit about and sort of expounding on them and giving them context. I think this story is the most leaning toward legendary, possibly apocryphal of any of the ones that we've done. But one of the things that we talked about in those first couple of conversations was mining the truth out of it. So where's the truth in this story that is, sort of a wild legend?
Okay. You want the truth? Because I can give it to you, but you're only going to hear it here.
Mm-hmm.
This did not happen. This 100% did not happen.
Yeah. Yep.
For me, I think this is 100% a legend. I actually played, I'm assuming everyone listening to this read or heard the story already, so I'm not spoiling anything here, but
yeah,
I'm assuming that I touched on like how the body started to kind of move a little bit and how Titus may have like seen that kind of spasm before. And my sense is that something along those lines led to this legend about him, picking up the head and preaching with it. So I kind of worked that in there. But for me, the fundamental truth, and I tried to boil this down to something reduced, something simple, but it's something in the ballpark of God being in control of life and death. And this character, Titus, is just so ruled by fear, and maybe more accurately put, control, because like that's really what his problem is not being in control of anything, which leads to fear, I guess. And so for him to just be faced with so many things that defy explanation and make it so hard for him to accept any control over what's happening in the world or in his life, makes it so clear and stark to him that God is in control, and that if God wants to raise someone from the dead, that's what he's going to do. And when Titus sees that image, particularly of like, hey, someone was actually martyred for their faith, which is what he's afraid of, and they didn't even die right away. Like they actually came back and had another go around for a little while. So like even maybe martyrdom is not something to be feared. And I think that kind of helped him glimpse beyond this world into like, hey, you're going to be in eternity way longer than you'll be alive. And, I try to think about this as often as possible, that, in 100 years, everyone me and everyone I know is gone, and maybe everyone I'll ever know will be gone in 100 years. And it's just not going to matter whether we all went at the same time or whether we were 50 years apart, or, when I'm 55, my cat Negan will be dead. And it doesn't really matter if he got hit by a car or if he lived to a ripe old age, or it's just what's going to happen, So not that things in this world don't matter, but God is so clearly in control, and there's so clearly so much more going on than just the things that we're afraid of and the things that we can't control, which seem so massive now.
Yeah. Well, I think your title of it is essentially the completely distilled version. It's Fear God, Not Man. And we get to see the character of Titus through this story, going from completely fearing man to fearing God. And what that looks like, and whether, this is a legendary story that grew out of something we don't necessarily know what, but it's a fun story to tell, and it illustrates for us what it looks like to witness the power of God, the things that God is capable of doing, and to orient your life because of that. In order, basically to say, I'm going to go from being afraid to I'm going to go and lead a church, even though that could potentially be dangerous to me. And I think, honestly, that's where the eternal perspective comes in this particular story, is that Titus shifts his focus from right here to seeing the scope at which God operates, and realizing that, this is just one life. This is one short time, and ultimately eternity is going to be a whole heck of a lot longer.
Yeah, I think it could also be orienting yourself around what because most of Titus's fears turn out to be nothing. I mean, he comes out as a Christian and he stays in Lutetia for maybe the rest of his life, and the empire never comes for him. So his fears were based on nothing, as it turns out, and he didn't know anything about what would happen to him or would not happen to him, but he knew God was faithful. He knew God was in charge of everything, and then he sees this body rise from the dead, and he knows that God can do that now. So doesn't it make so much more sense to orient your life around what the things about God's character that and not the things that are unknown, like what the authorities are going to do, or what people are going to think, or how you're going to die, or you don't know any of that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, but there is one known.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Well said.
To backtrack just a little bit, so we know that this story is a legend, but the circumstances surrounding it in terms of there being that level of persecution and decrees from emperors and things like that, that was sort of a pendulum that swung back and forth for quite a bit during the early church, whether there was an emperor who was a Christian or at least very tolerant of Christians to let's make Roman candles.
Yeah.
So the time frame at which this is happening, that was actually operating within that level of persecution.
Yeah, for sure. This was the same year, as it turns out, which I knew about both of these things. I knew about the burning incense to Caesar, and I knew about Saint Denis, but I didn't realize that they happened the same year.
Yeah.
So even though they weren't in the same place, like it was the same empire that was, forcing people to partake in a pagan ritual, or probably die. And that was the same year that Denis died. And there's some historical speculation that he did not take part in that ritual, and that's part of what took him out.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense in the cultural context.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, dude. I meant to plug that in before we started, and I forgot.
No worries. Technical difficulties happen.
Okay. All right.
Next time we do this, when you do the handwriting on the wall story, we'll make sure we do your interview out here at the studio, so we can do it. We can do it in person.
That would be cool.
Yeah,
I'd like to do that.
Yeah. So we talked. We talked about the theme of. I mean, the story is perfectly named, of fearing God, and having a correct perspective in terms of the length of our lives and the length of eternity. Are there any other themes that you put into the work that you really enjoyed, just as the author of it?
I really liked the theme of living. I don't know if this is a theme. It's something. It was an element of the story throughout, was living under this occupying force, because it's just something I can't imagine. It's something I've never had to deal with technically, unless you count the federal government an occupying force. But it's something that so many people.
It's another podcast.
Yeah, this isn't everything else. There's something about that. I'm actually, to my shame, I haven't read Lord of the Rings, but I'm reading Wingfeather right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't read those, I've only read the first one, but it's awesome. They are occupied in their little village by this army of like lizard beings, like poisonous lizard, like humanoid lizards, and it's just that's like the best image of what an occupying army is like. It's like a different species, but they they move in and they act like they belong there, and they start bossing you around, they assimilate, and it's just this kind of gross violation, and I've always wondered what that's like, and have always been kind of intrigued in a really horrific way as to what that would be like. But it's a reality that so much of humanity has had to deal with, even to this day, that it's something that I can't wrap my mind around. I also decapitation in general is kind of a theme throughout this story. There's a slight hint at the beginning of Denis, which is not the most theologically accurate allegory or metaphor, but the empire was kind of thinking of him as like the head of the church, and if they cut him off, then the body will die. And how wrong they were, and that ends up playing itself out physically in Denis himself, that even cutting his head off didn't quite kill the body. And now obviously we know like Christ is the head of the church, but this is, how pagans think about this and how this is going to go, and how persecuting the church tends to grow it, and not what you actually want when you persecute the church. So I was kind of playing with that a little bit in general, this idea that not only can death be defied, but cutting the head off of something doesn't necessarily mean that everything else is going to follow.
Yeah, really, really cool. That's kind of what I was thinking of, in terms of you're thinking you're cutting off the head of the church, and really the body winds up having much more of an impact because of those actions. Yeah. Really cool.
It's a very heavy-handed metaphor if you know what the story is going to be about.
Yeah.
Like when I read it while I was rewriting it, I was like, come on, dude, cutting off the head of the body, like that's so specific. And then I was like, most people aren't going to know what this is about going in. So like it might be cool looking back on it that you didn't know what was coming.
No, I think it has reread value or re-listen value, I guess, in this case. But yeah, dude, I mean, overall, just really, really great work. And if for some reason people have gotten to this point in this video and haven't listened to your story yet, I'm just going to encourage them to go listen to the story. It's, even if you kind of know what's happening, it's worth seeing how things unfold. So yeah,
absolutely. And you did such a good job reading it, dude. I liked the story written, but then hearing you read it just like really brought it home. And there were a couple of parts that they, like, long after I turned in my final draft to you, I kind of thought over some parts and I was like, oh man, I don't know if I love how that's worded. And then just the way you read it was like, oh no, that works. That totally works. Like it doesn't work in my head when I'm reading it, but when you read it out loud on the podcast, it totally works. So
thanks,
I can't thank you enough for what you brought to the project as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hearkening back to the beginning of our conversation where you were talking about TV and movies and things like that, and people who want to tell stories becoming directors or actors or something like that. And that's kind of the route that I went. And I have the opportunity to do both kind of now. But it's sort of that collaborative process that I find really, really fun. Because if I write a story and then I read the story, I can say it exactly how I want to. And there's some value in that. But if I write a story and someone else reads it, or if someone else writes a story and I read it, then there's more minds and more hands on the project, which makes it something kind of different. I would use a J.R.R. Tolkien metaphor, but you haven't read him yet.
I might be able to understand the metaphor.
Okay, so in the Silmarillion, right, Tolkien writes a creation myth, and a lot of it has to do with song, and the one god giving these slightly lesser beings called the Valar. He gives them each a song to sing, and with their song, they can create. Co-create with him and shape the world. And they start to find that if they combine their songs, they can make new things. Like one has the song of earth and fire, and the other has the song of water. And when those come together, you have mist. Things like that. And I think that's, that we can make really cool art on our own, but it's also fun to come together and do things together and to encourage each other to read the classics.
I feel like I'm gonna regret telling you that I haven't read those.
You are, because I'm gonna text you every day until you've completed it.
I literally, when I started reading Wingfeather, my actual thought was, I don't know if I should take this on before I've read Lord of the Rings. Like, I think I should probably read Lord of the Rings first. Have you read Rick Rubin's Creative Act?
No, but I've heard so much about it and seen bits and pieces all over the place that I'm familiar. But I need to.
It's very cool, and he's I think he's Buddhist, so there's a little bit of yada yada in there about that we can excuse, but there's so much cool stuff about creativity in there. And one of the things that he says is that all ideas are kind of recycled material in a way. Like you're kind of just taking in books and music and poetry and all this stuff, and then you're kind of putting it into something. And Slayer may not be a direct impact on anything that I write in my mind, but Slayer is something I've taken in a lot of over the years, and maybe in some indirect way they're influencing my writing. And so you can never really be sure of that. And collaboration is the best example we have of that. It's like for two separate things to come together and just they're gonna create something unique. It just happens.
Yeah, that's how you get songs like Under Pressure. Two unique artists collaborating. Yeah. Along that same theme, and I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna quote some J.R.R. Tolkien at you, dude. It's you're really gonna like this. So
I better.
He gave an interview on BBC. So this, you can actually watch this interview. It's in black and white, but it's actually Tolkien himself saying this. And somebody asked him, "So why create The Hobbit, and how would you make that? You made this whole world before you even wrote it. Why and how would you do that?" And he said, I can't tell you why someone would want to create these things, but I can tell you that being made by a creator, one of our chief things that we want to do is to create. But we as created beings can't actually create, so we subcreate, or in other words, we rearrange our world in a way that's aesthetically pleasing to us. And I think that is sort of in line with the Rick Rubin quote that you were just talking about, in terms of all of these elements exist. It's what are we going to do with them, and how are we going to arrange them in a way that's pleasing to ourselves and to hopefully our audience.
Yeah, it's like creation ex nihilo. That's God creating out of nothing, and then there's God forming things out of pre-existing materials, and we see both of those in the creation account. Like he makes man out of dust, so he's kind of repurposing dust to be something else. We're only capable of the latter. We're not going to create something entirely out of thin air. We can't even create nothing. So we're just working with pre-existing materials, but there's still so much that can be made out of it. It just, you would think that ideas are finite and that there's a limit to how much we can create as a species, and it just doesn't seem like it. There's still cool movies. Can you believe that? You ever think about that? It's 2024 and there's still cool movies coming out.
Yeah.
How? It's all been done.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. There's a lot of not cool ones too, but there are cool ones. You can find cool ones,
and they're very popular.
Yeah. All right, dude. Well, hey, thanks for doing this with me. I mean, thanks for writing the story. Thanks for talking with me like this. I know you got a little one. We were working on this story on both sides of your daughter being born. So that was a big thing to take on. So thanks for doing this with me. Before I let you go, I want you to talk about Black Threads, and then if you can, give us a little clue as to your new book and when you're expecting that to come out.
Black Threads, very failed novel that I wrote. It's kind of a dramatic mystery about church corruption, church leadership abuse, and this pastor who had lost his faith entirely and was kind of lost in alcoholism, still doing his job because it's just the only thing he knows how to do, but he's also trying to expose this corruption among his leadership, and not seeing the very brash hypocrisy in the things that he's doing in his personal life versus the people he's trying to expose. That'd be my elevator pitch for it. It's all right. but this one that I'm writing now is really cool. I'm really liking this. Yeah, I'm actually still typing out the manuscript. I wrote the manuscript, and I'm 100 as of today. I've typed out 154,000 words, and I'm still on the last notebook, so we still have a little bit of a ways to go, and then I'll be on to the first draft. I was really hoping to get this one out by the end of the year, but it's not looking like it now. But yeah, it's a horror story that takes place out in the desert, and yeah, there's like almost nothing I can say that would make sense about it. But the theme is of legacy and grief, and just sort of dealing with the issue, the fact of life that everyone and everything is going to die, and that we want to be remembered, but there's not necessarily a point in that, and there's no point in being preoccupied with that and missing your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's very Stephen King of you to longhand write hundreds of thousands of words and then transcribe them. So well done there. I'm going to push back on your self-deprecation of that first book, though. I was struck from the very beginning by your very unique tone. I think the book is niche. Like the premise of the book is pretty niche, which is maybe what you're getting at. But the language and the tone and the style with which you approach it is really enjoyable, because it's not like slipping into a comfort show or some novel that you're going to be able to just consume over the course of your airplane flight and then forget you ever wrote it or forget you ever read it because the plot is exactly the same as everything else. It feels more like an art film, in that you're watching this thing unfold and you're just kind of going like, what the heck is happening? But it's the language of it is really, really entertaining in and of itself. So I thought you did a great job.
I appreciate you saying that. I really appreciate you saying that. I didn't know you read it. And if you told me that and I forgot, that's my bad. I wasn't going to put you on the spot and ask.
Yeah.
But Phil and Hillary over at the Book Duet podcast called it a quick read.
Well,
so I don't know what to do with that.
They are voracious readers. I think everything to them
that's true
is a quick read. And I think word count wise, they're probably right. It wasn't a mountain of a novel, but it was one of those that I enjoyed chewing on the language. That I think that's the only way that I can say that. The way that it was written was as entertaining to me as the story itself.
Good.
So yeah,
that's actually something I was aiming for. I was actually aiming for, like, even if this plot kind of sucks, I want every paragraph I want there to be something in there for everyone to enjoy about, just some weird word or some, funny thing.
And that's on Amazon. And so we can get that in the Kindle format as well, as I think that's how I have it.
Yep.
I think I got the Kindle because
ebook and paperback.
The paperback wasn't ready yet or something like that.
Anyway. That's right. At the time, they didn't have pre-orders for paperback for some reason. So you could only pre-order the Kindle version.
Yeah.
Tanked my sales.
Well, hey, love you, dude. Thanks for doing this with me. For everybody else, we'll have all Nick's links in the show notes here, so that you can find his book. You can find his sort of instructions about writing and things like that. Anything you want to find.
I'm Nick C. Steward on everything, all social media, YouTube, all that. My website is nickcsteward.com, and that's where you can find everything.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, man. I love you.